Okay, so in our last lesson, I talked about the synoptic gospel, why the synoptic gospel was delayed, as well as the canonization of the New Testament. So today I'll be taking the synoptic gospel as well as the synoptic problem. But before that, what are you going to be looking at? So first off, I'll be defining the synoptic gospel. Then I'll identify some similarities and differences of the synoptic gospel. Then I'll also talk about the understanding of the synoptic problem as well as the major solutions to the synoptic problem. So let's start with the definition of the synoptic gospel first off. So question now is, what are the synoptic gospels? The synoptic gospel are the first three books of the New Testament in the Bible, and that has to do with the book of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So the book of John is not part of the synoptic gospel, basically. So it's just a gospel entirely on its own. So the three major synoptic gospels we have in the New Testament is the book of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So why are they called the synoptic gospel? The term synoptic comes from a Greek word called syn, which means together, and also opposite. So it's basically divided into two parts. That synoptic word is divided into two parts, syn and opposite. For the syn part, it means together, and for the opposite, it means view. So basically, the synoptics means saying together. So this gospel are known as synoptic gospel because they share a similar perspective and narrative structure, often recounting many of the same events, teachings, and miracles of Jesus Christ. So while they have similarities, each gospel also have their own unique focus and emphasis. For example, let's say that the book of Matthew now, his own focus or his own major emphasis was on Jesus as the Messiah and fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies. While the book of Mark focused on how Jesus suffered as a servant and also emphasized his actions and miracles while he was on earth. Then the book of Luke highlights Jesus' compassion for the marginalized and also included detailed narratives about Jesus' humanity on earth. So the Gospel of John is not part of the synoptic because it have a different approach and it is not considered as something similar to the three other synoptic gospel, that's the book of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So let's move down to the overview of the synoptic gospels, the similarities between the synoptic gospel basically. So the synoptic gospel shares several similarities. That is the book of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. They are similar in some certain ways. The first similarity they have is they have a shared narrative structure in the sense that the three gospels follow a similar outline of Jesus' life, his ministry, his death, and his resurrection. If you take notes, if you are reading the book of Matthew and book of Mark and book of Luke, you feel that what they are saying are like a repeat of what the first two gospels, like let's say the book of Luke, for example. Now, if you read the book of Luke and you've read the book of Matthew and Mark before, you feel that they are just repeating the sentences or the wordings there, but there's a difference in that account basically. So one major similarity there, like I mentioned earlier, is the shared narrative structure, whereby they have similar outline of Jesus' life, his ministry, his death, and his resurrection. Then another similarity is the miracles and healings of Jesus, whereby the miracles and healings of Jesus are recorded in the three gospels. So what are these miracles that can be found in the three synoptic gospels? That is the feeding of the 5,000 can be found in the three gospels. The healing of the blind man also can be found in the three gospels. So this it has similarities in miracles and healings of Jesus. Another similarity there is the parables of Jesus, whereby it has many of the same parables. For example, the parable of the sower and the parable of the mustard seed are basically found in the three synoptic gospel. Then we have the baptism of Jesus, whereby the three gospel all describes Jesus' baptism by John the Baptist, where the Holy Spirit descends upon him. Then we also have the temptation in the wilderness, the passion narratives, and the key teachings of Jesus. So these are the major similarities between the synoptic gospels, that's the book of Matthew, the book of Mark, and the book of Luke. So let me just highlight them one after the other in case you are taking notes. One major narrative there is the shared narrative structure. The second aspect is the similar miracles and healings. The third one is the parables of Jesus. The fourth is baptism of Jesus. The fifth is temptation in the wilderness. The sixth is passion narratives, and lastly, the key teachings of Jesus. So basically, these are the similarities between the synoptic gospels. We've not yet moved down to the synoptic problem, but we'll get there. So we are basically looking at the similarities and differences between the synoptic gospels. So I've talked about the similarities, seven similarities basically between the synoptic gospel, the book of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, basically. So moving down to their differences, we have seven differences also of the synoptic gospel. One difference there is the genealogy of Jesus, whereby the book of Matthew traces Jesus' lineage through Joseph down to King David and then to Abraham. And this can be found in the book of Matthew 1, verse 1 to 17. Then we have how the book of Luke traces Jesus' lineage through Mary down to King David and then to Adam. So it can an evidence can be found in the book of Luke 3, verse 23 to 38. So you see the difference here, difference in lineage, genealogy of Jesus basically. That's to say that the book of Matthew traces Jesus' ancestry lineage to Joseph, but the book of Luke traces it from Mary down to King David, then to Adam. But the book of Matthew on stops at Abraham, from David down to Abraham. So another difference there is the birth narratives, whereby the book of Matthew focuses on Jesus' perspectives, including the journey of the Magi, the visit, basically, the visit of the three wise men as we know it in the Bible. And this can be found in the book of Matthew 1 to 2. While in the book of Luke, it emphasizes Mary's perspectives, including the annunciations and the shepherd's visits. So basically, the book of Matthew have Joseph's own standpoint or his own viewpoint about the visit of the three wise men, while the book of Luke has Mary's own standpoint about the visit of the three wise men. Then another difference we have there is the temptation order, how the the three temptations of Jesus were arranged. Was it chronologically or scattered? So we have how the book of Matthew and Luke have different order in the second and third temptations of Jesus. Because if you read through the book of Matthew 4, verse 1 to 11, and the book of Luke 4, verse 1 to 13, you see that the way Jesus' temptation was arranged is different. It can be that the when the devil told Jesus to jump down from the this thing and perform an act of worship to him, and he will give him all the kingdom to them, is different from how the book of Luke arranges it. Maybe the third temptation of Jesus was basically the second temptation of Jesus in the book of Matthew, while the second temptation of Jesus in the book of Matthew is the third temptation of Jesus in the book of Luke. Then another difference we have there is the parables and teachings, because Matthew groups Jesus' teachings into sorry Matthew groups Jesus' own teaching into large blocks. For example, the Sermon on the Mount, which can be found in the book of Matthew 5 to 7, while the book of Luke included the parables that were not found in the book of Matthew or even in the book of Mark, such as the Good Samaritan and the prodigal son. So an evidence can be found in the book of Luke 10, verse 25 to 37, and 15, verse 11 to 32. Another major difference there again is the miracles and
Sorry, ma,
healings
your
of
screen is not showing.
Jesus. My screen
Yeah,
is not
it's
showing.
just green. Okay, thank you.
Hold on.
Oh, not sure.
Can you see it?
No, it's not. Yeah, I'm seeing it, but not the thing you're teaching.
Okay, hold on. Is it showing?
Yes, my showing. Thank you.
Okay, so I was talking about the fifth difference between the synoptic gospel, and I made mention of the miracles and healings, whereby the book of Mark emphasizes Jesus' miracles and often uses a more vivid language to portray the miracles of Jesus. And this can be found in the book of Mark 5, verse 21 to 43. While in the book of Luke, under the miracles and healing differences, it highlights Jesus' compassions and healing ministry, especially for women and outcasts. And an evidence of this can be found in the book of Luke 7, verse 36 to 50, and also chapter 13, verse 10 to 17. Then a sixth difference of the synoptic gospel is the passion narratives, whereby the book of Matthew and Mark, they both share similarities in their passion accounts, but the book of Luke differs because it includes a very unique detail, like Jesus' conversation with the thief on the cross. You know the conversation Jesus had with the thief on the cross when while he was being persecuted. So it can be found in the book of Luke 23, verse 39 to 43. Then another difference there, the last difference I'm going to mention is the resurrection accounts. Resurrection accounts in the sense that the book of Matthew includes the guard at the tomb, like the person guarding the tomb, and also an earthquake. Luke treats in the book of Matthew 28, verse 2 to 4. But Mark, on the other hand, ends abruptly with the women fleeing the empty tomb. He did not mention about the guard and the earthquake. He just mentioned about the women fleeing the empty tomb. And can be found in the book of Mark 16, verse 1 to 8. Then the book of Luke, under the resurrection account, also describes the road to Emmaus, whereby they encountered Jesus also, and Jesus' appearance to the disciples. So the book of Mark basically ended with describing how Jesus appeared to the two disciples on their way. So these differences reflect the unique perspective, the audiences, as well as the theological emphasis of each of the gospel writers. So let's now move down to the synoptic problem. The synoptic problem, basically. So how do we define the synoptic problem? As we said, that the synoptic gospel has to do with the first three books in the New Testament. That's the book of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Now, what is the synoptic problem? The synoptic problem is a scholarly challenge, basically a very difficult challenge by some scholars in biblical studies, because they seek to understand the literary relationship between the three synoptic gospels. That means this problem of the synoptic gospel is that scholars has find it difficult to understand the relationship, that is the similarities between these three synoptic gospels, the book of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So the problem arises because these the gospel, they all share
Sorry, Mama, your screen is green again.
Jesus. Ew. Is it okay now?
Yes, Mom. Thank you.
Okay, so as I was saying, the synoptic problem arises because the three Gospels, that's the book of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they both share many similarities, both in contents, in wordings, and the structure in which they are arranged. So they also exhibit some key differences in their contents. So now the question now is, why do they share so much material? That is the question of the that falls under the synoptic problem. That is, why do the synoptic gospel share so much material, like literally verbatim, word for word? And the second question is, why do they differ in certain accounts or details? And thirdly, which gospel might have influenced the others? In the sense that people believe that, or some scholars basically, they believe that the book of Mark was the first gospel to be written, while some other scholars believe that the book of Matthew was the first gospel to be written. That's why it was arranged as such in the New Testament. So this has been a synoptic problem to some scholars, a synoptic challenge to some scholars. So we have several theories that have been proposed to explain this relationship, like proposed as a solution to explain the relationship between the three synoptic gospel. So now, what are the proposed solutions? One solution there is the
Sorry, ma. The screen is green again. Immediately when you change it, I don't know what's wrong. Maybe it's network or something.
well. Let me try something. Hold on.
It's okay now.
Yes.
It's okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Maybe it's because I'm dropping it. Okay, as I was saying, the synoptic problem has some major solutions to it. And what are the solutions there? As you can see on your screen, we have the two source hypothesis, that is the mark and the hypothetical source. So the two source hypothesis is basically stating how Matthew and Luke both used Mark as a source, like they both copied book of Matthew and Luke, they both copied from the book of Mark. So this was one of the proposed theory in order to explain the relationship between the book of Matthew, Mark, Luke. So we also have the Farrer hypothesis, which makes Mark the first gospel. That is, Matthew used Mark, while Luke used both Mark and Matthew. This Farrer hypothesis has been raised as a question in JUPEB exams. For example, they ask how many percent of book of Mark can be found in both the book of Matthew and Luke. Is it 90% Matthew, 50% Luke, 30% Matthew, 40% Luke? So this has been a major question in JUPEB exam basically. So we also have the Grisbach hypothesis, whereby Matthew wrote first. So Mark used Matthew and Luke. Sorry, I was talking about the Grisbach hypothesis. The Grisbach hypothesis is talking about how Matthew is considered the first gospel to be written, and Mark used Matthew as a source, while the Gospel of Luke used both Matthew and Mark as a source. So the synoptic problem has remained a central topic in the New Testament studies, but in order to help scholars understand the composition and transmission of this gospel, they basically need to consider the proposed solutions or the proposed theories of the synoptic gospel. So I've mentioned the several theories that have been proposed in order to explain this relationship. Let me just highlight them again, but it's already shown on your screen there. So the theories there that has been proposed to explain this relationship includes the two-source hypothesis that has to do with how Matthew and Luke independently used Mark as a source. Then we have the Farrer hypothesis, whereby Matthew used Mark and Luke used both Mark and Matthew as a source. Then we have the Grisbach hypothesis, whereby Matthew wrote first, or Matthew was considered the first gospel to be written. Then Mark used Matthew as a source, and Luke used both Matthew and Mark. So let me just mention some problems or challenges associated with the synoptic gospel. I've explained what the synoptic problem is. I defined the synoptic problem. So I've also mentioned the theories that they brought about in order to explain the relationship between the three gospels. Now down to the major problems. Basically, I'll be mentioning 7 problems
My
of.
screen has gone green again.
Is it okay?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
So I'll be mentioning the 7 problems or challenges that is associated with the synoptic gospels. That is the first 3 gospels of the New Testament. So one of the problem there is the understanding of the literal relationship between Matthew, Mark, and Luke, including the similarities and differences in their accounts. Another problem or challenges associated with the synoptic gospel is the harmonization that has to do with the reconciling differences between the gospels, such as their differences in wordings, details, and chronology. So these difference in chronological order, difference in content or wording, difference in details, because basically the 3 gospels did not like copy it word for word. They, how will I put it, they used their own words or they changed the phrases in order to like use all of them as a source basically. So we have the harmonization as a problem or challenges associated with the synoptic gospel. The third problem associated with the synoptic gospel is the source criticism, whereby it identifies the sources behind the gospel, such as the hypothetical Q source and the understanding of their role in shaping the narratives of the gospels. Then another problem or challenge there is the redaction criticism. The redaction criticism is trying to determine how the gospel writers edited and adapted their source in order to convey their important message. That is the message that they were trying to pass across with their gospel. So that's what the redaction criticism under the synoptic problem is talking about. Then we have the historical reliability as another challenge. The historical reliability tries to assess the historical accuracy of the events and teachings recorded in the Gospels. Then the sixth challenge there is the chronological discrepancies, whereby it tries to understand the arrangement or the chronological order, basically the timing and sequence of events, such as the cleansing of the temple or the resurrection appearances, how they are arranged in each of the gospels. Basically, the resurrection appearances of Jesus can be the last or can be found in the early parts of the book of Matthew. But if you look at the book of Luke, it can basically be found as, let's say, the middle of the gospel, the writers, basically. So another challenge or another problem of the synoptic gospel is their theological emphasis, because it tries to balance the unique or the important theological perspective of each of the gospel writers with the shared message of Jesus Christ. So these challenges have requires careful analysis as well as interpretation and understanding of the historical as well as cultural context in which the gospels were written. So just as I've mentioned the synoptic problems, I think I need to highlight them one after the other. So in order to highlight the synoptic problem, I mentioned one as the understanding of the relationship, the literary relationship between the 3 gospels, that's the book of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Then the second one is the harmonization. It has to do with the difference in wordings, details, or chronology. The third one is the source criticism as a problem or challenge that is associated with the synoptic gospel. So we also have the
Ma'am,
redaction criticism. Yes.
sorry, please. Are you in? Why is it a problem since? Cause it's not even changing in my side, and I've been hearing you say so many things.
Like it's still what is showing on your own screen.
Why is it a problem?
Yeah, that's what I'm still talking about now. I've not
Okay.
moved it. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, okay, I'm still highlighting the synoptic problems. I've not yet moved to the next part. Has it changed now on your screen?
No, mine is not showing. It's showing green.
Is it still showing?
No.
It's not
Yeah.
showing. It's
Still
showing now.
not. Yes.
Wow, all this network. Okay, so as I was highlighting it, the fourth one has to do with the redaction criticism that tries to determine how the gospel writers edited and adapted their source in order to convey their literary messages. Then the fifth is the historical reliability. Then the sixth one is the this, chronological discrepancies. Then lastly, we have the theological emphasis. So these are all the problems or challenges faced by scholars who are trying to understand the relationship between the synoptic gospel. So we have some proposed solutions to these challenges or problems. Now, what are the proposed solutions there? The proposed solutions there is the two source hypothesis. I've mentioned that under the theories that tries to explain the relationship between the three gospels. But I'll mention there. So we have the two source hypothesis, whereby the book of Matthew and Luke used Mark and also the Q source, as the quell source, as a source for their own writing. Then we are under the two source hypothesis. We also have the Farrer hypothesis, whereby Matthew used Mark and Luke, and also the book of Luke used both Mark and Matthew. Then, under the proposed solution for the harmonization aspects, because I mentioned the harmonization aspects under the challenges or problems facing the synoptic gospel. So, under the harmonization aspects, the solution that was proposed under it was the contextual interpretation, whereby understanding each gospel, the context of the gospel, as well as the purpose of the gospel is well explained. Then we have the literary analysis that tries to recognize the different literary styles and genres of the three gospels. Then, under the source criticism, a proposed solution that was made for it was the Q source hypothesis, whereby it has a hypothetical source that shared the sense of Jesus in both the book of Matthew and the book of Luke. Then under that source criticism also, we have oral traditions as a proposed solution under it, whereby the materials that was passed down orally before being written down was tried to be found out or was trying to be gotten as a witness. Then we have the redaction criticism. A proposed solution under it is the theological emphasis, whereby each gospel, that is the writings of the gospel, they have different theological agenda in the sense that their message in the gospel are different. That's the proposed solution that the scholars are trying to point out, that the wordings or the message that the three gospels were trying to pass across is different in the three of them. So we also have community context under the source criticism, basically. Sorry, under the redaction criticism, we have community context that tries to reflect how the gospel points or arrange the needs and concerns of the communities, how they arrange them in their book or how they use their book. Then under historical reliability, we have under the historical reliability, the proposed solution under it is the historical.
Ah, it has gone blank again.
Is it still blank?
No, thank you.
Under the historical reliability, it's talking about a proposed solution under it is the historical Jesus research, whereby scholars try to reconstruct Jesus' lives and teachings. Then we also have archaeological evidence that tends to be a solution under historical reliability. That is, they try to find out some archaeological evidence that really supports the evidence of some gospel accounts. For example, if you look at some museums, you see some manuscripts, like a half part of some manuscripts that can be found in some museum, basically in the United States, because I'm not sure there's anyone in Nigeria. So if you look at some, or if you go to some museums in the United States, you see that some manuscripts that, like for example, the book of Matthew, the manuscripts of the book of Matthew before it was written down and distributed to Christians around the world today, the original copy of that book of Matthew can be found in that museum. So it basically supports the evidence that the book of Matthew was trying to point across. Then, under the chronological discrepancies, we have the different perspective whereby each gospel writers may have had different priorities or sources in which they used for their gospel writing. Then, under the chronological discrepancies, also, the proposed solution there is the literary arrangement, whereby the events of the gospel, of the three gospels, may have been written in a very or in a well arranged order thematically, the sense that the moral lesson there are arranged chronologically rather than in different aspects. Then the seventh proposed solution under the problem there, we have the theological emphasis as a problem that I mentioned earlier. So the proposed solution under it is the Christological focus, whereby each gospel tries to present a unique portrait of Jesus. Then we have the thematic analysis also as a proposed solution. So the thematic analysis tries to identify occurring themes and motifs in each gospels. So these are the proposed solutions under the synoptic problems. So I think I've come to the end of today's lesson, but what is the food for thought there, or what will you take up? Just take it as an assignment, just a question, Sha. So what's the question there? The question on your screen says, if Mark was written first, why would Matthew and Luke still use it rather than write their own? So I think you should research on that. Then in the next lesson, we'll talk about it. Next week, basically, next week, Tuesday, we'll discuss about it. So let me quickly have a recap of what I talked about in week 5. So the week 5 topic there is, sorry, let me share the screen. The division of the kingdom, basically, division of the nation of Israel. You can still see my screen, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so I'll be talking about the divided kingdom and the exile. It's week 6 topic, sorry. So the divided kingdom and the exile. Let me just quickly narrate it for you to have an idea of how the nation of Israel was divided and how they were sent into exile. So the division of the kingdom of Israel were divided into two separate kingdoms. That's the nation of Israel and the nation of Judah. So the division occurred around 930 BCE. Please take note of the dates, 930 BCE, after the death of King Solomon. So this was a very important event in biblical history and can be found in the book of First King chapter 12 entirely. So the United Monarchy was formed or established under King Saul. Was established under King Saul, and it expanded under the reign of David, who was the second king of Israel. So it reached its end under King Solomon's wise and prosperous reign. However, Solomon's later years were marked by his challenges, the difficulties he found in his reign, or the temptations, let me say, the temptations he found in his reign, because his later years, he started well, but towards the end of his own reign as king, he found himself engaging in idolatry and heavy taxation in order to support his building projects, including the building of the temple in Jerusalem. So these factors led to the division of the nation of Israel into two parts. So the division was sparked or was later fueled when Solomon's successor, that is Solomon's son, Rehoboam, refused to alleviate or lighten the heavy burdens imposed by his father to the northern tribes. So this led the northern tribes to rebel against him. So the northern tribes, led by Jeroboam, approached Rehoboam at Shechem. Remember the place, Shechem. So they approached Rehoboam seeking relief from the taxes and forced labor that Solomon had imposed on them. So instead of Rehoboam to heed to the wise counsel of the elders, he rather listened to the advice of his peer group because he felt maybe the advice of the older men during his father's time was no longer relevant. So he decided to listen to the advice of his peers. So he responded harshly by declaring that he would increase their burden. So this led to the northern tribes to revolt or rebel against him. So according to the northern tribes, he said, what share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, O Israel, look after your own house, O David. So this statement can be found in the book of First Kings 12, verse 16, because it was made by the elders of the northern tribes because of the anger or the um, response that Rehoboam gave to them with regards to him lightening of the burden placed upon them by Solomon. So the United Kingdom of Israel therefore split into two, and it fulfilled the prophecy given to Ahijah, Prophet Ahijah by God, whereby he said that the kingdom of Israel will be divided into two, whereby 10 tribes will be given to Solomon's servant, which was Jeroboam, and 2 tribes will be left to Solomon's son, Rehoboam. So, is it okay now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So I'm talking about Jeroboam's reign now, which is under the kingdom of Israel. So the kingdom of Israel had its capital in Samaria, and it was made up of the 10 tribes. So the 10 tribes basically that was under the reign of Jeroboam faced several challenges such as political instability, frequent kingship change or frequent rulers change basically, or dynastic changes. So it also faced idolatry also. Idolatry was also a challenge to the kingdom of Israel. Why was it a challenge? So the challenge because Jeroboam feared that his subjects would return to Jerusalem and temples. So sorry, and the temple that was established in Jerusalem, because he feared that when the people go there to worship, they will not feel like coming back to Israel. So he decided to establish an alternative form of worship centers in order to replace the temple that was at Jerusalem. So he established 2 worship centers, one at Dan and one at Bethel. So after introducing the centers, instead of him to like make the people hearts follow God, he crafted 2 golden calf idols. So this led to the nation of Israel coming into idolatry. So this religious deviation led to a cycle of sin, judgment, and recurring prophetic calls to repentance in Israel's history. Because this is the part read by the prophets, prophets such as Hosea, Amos, Obadiah, they all like called the Israelites to repentance. So Israel's history was marked by conflicts with Judah and also neighboring nations. So it ultimately led to the downfall of the kingdom of Israel under Jeroboam's reign in 722 BCE, because the nation of Israel was captured by the Assyrian army. So they conquered Samaria and then they deported many of the Israelites inhabitants to Assyria. So the nation of Israel was conquered by Assyria in 722 BC. Please take note of the date, 722 BCE. It was conquered by Assyria. That's for the nation of Israel under Jeroboam's reign. While for the kingdom of Judah or the nation of Judah under Rehoboam's reign, it had its own capital in Jerusalem. Like I mentioned earlier, the kingdom of Israel had its own capital in Samaria, while the kingdom of Judah had its own capital in Jerusalem. So the kingdom of Judah was more stable and they also retained the Davidic dynasty. But it was also this kingdom also faced idolatry and sin, because Judah experienced religious reforms under King Hezekiah and Josiah. Because if you are reading the book of that king, book of First King 12, you also take note of the religious reforms that was carried out by King Josiah because of the idolatrous practices the people were practicing at that time. So this was a form of or a sort of challenge to the kingdom of Judah. So Josiah seek to centralize the worship in Jerusalem by establishing by carrying out a religious reform, but that's not what I'm talking about. So Judah's survival was prolonged due to its strategic location and also occasional divine intervention, but it was eventually captured by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon and was sent into exile in 586 BCE. Take note, for the nation of Israel, I said that when they were captured, it was around 722 BC by the Assyrian. But for the nation of Judah, it was captured in 586 BCE by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. And he destroyed the temple, and also he took many of the Judeans into exile to Babylon. So the division of the kingdom had a very profound theological as well as historical implications, because it also fulfilled the prophetic warnings about the consequences of disobedience and the failures of the leaders of that two tribes. So the two kingdoms became distinct in their religious practices as well as their political faiths. They are serving as case studies in biblical narrative also. So it also shows the importance of faithfulness, because if you read through the story of the divided kingdom as well as the exile, you see that it's basically teaching about the importance of being faithful to God rather than taking up idolatrous practices. So kingdom, the division of the kingdom had a very profound theological as well as historical implications, because it fulfilled the prophecy that was given to Ahijah by God. So I think I've come to the end of today's lesson. But let me just, the causes of the exile. But if you don't know, let me just highlight them. The causes of the exile was due to the
My your
continuous
blank
disobedience.
your screen is blank again.
Oh my God.
This thing is frustrating, like, sorry. Even when it goes black again, I'll just leave it down. It's
Huh?
network. When it goes blank again, I'll just leave it. It's network that is causing it.
Is this T blank?
Yes. No,
Okay.
no, it's okay.
It's not blank.
Yes, it's okay now. Thank you.
Okay. So I mentioned the causes of the exile because the division of the kingdom. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma.
Okay, so the division of the kingdom comes before the exile, because it was after the kingdoms were captured by those two empires. That was what led to the exile. So one of the causes of the exile was due to the disobedience to God's command by the two kings, and also the idolatry and worship of foreign gods by these two nations, as well as the social injustice and corruption among the leaders, then the ignoring of the prophetic warnings that were given to them before they were captured. So these were the major causes of the exiles.